I always enjoy these probably more than you do. I enjoy just having the opportunity to share what God has shown me about this area, about the church I've served. And this is one of the prime times to do it, because you guys, like me, I think all remember a lot of this, or we're very aware of it because of the length of our lives so far. In other words, we have probably a better touch than the younger generation.
Well, I just wanted to greet everybody and thank you all for coming and joining us for breakfast. And we're really very, very appreciative of you taking the time to come and join us. And you're always like a big draw. It's a big draw, right? We really enjoy. Yes, yes. But it's really special to be able to have you here, at Christmas with us, and to have all of you here for breakfast at Christmas. And in January, the men's breakfast will be Thursday, January 4th. And our new town planner, John Cashel, has agreed to come and talk. And he's very pleasant. I think you'll really enjoy hearing about his past experiences and some of what he's working on now. He's also asked for pancakes, so it's a good thing. But thank you so much, Bill.
Well, I say I enjoy it probably more than they do. So.
Well, we really enjoy it. And we always take away such interesting information, so thank you so much.
Well, I hope that proves out today.
Oh, yeah. I'm going to grab the coffee, but we still have a little bit more in case anybody needs any more. Coffee, if you need it. And I'm going to close the door so you don't hear the dishwasher. But thank you.
Thank you. Well, when God gave me the call to go to Byfield, and before that to come to Him, He gives gifts. He gives you gifts that you need to have in order to do what He calls you to do. That may only make sense. After all, we're made of dust, and He is God, not us. And if you read the book of Daniel, you'll see this interestingly put forward. When the Babylonians captured the Israelis in 500 BC, it was the beginning of an entire new era for the world, because now God's people, the Israelites, He had chosen them, are now going to be under the leadership or the rulership of Gentiles. Babylon, Persia, Greece, they all came in turn, Rome eventually. And why I say this is because the king of Babylon, not Daniel, the king of Babylon gets a vision of all of this. It's just a vision, but it's a vision. He sees a statue that scares him half to death. It's massive, it's glorious, it's got all kinds of, the way it's described, just all kinds of greatness to the statue. Anyway, it puts Nebuchadnezzar, so to say, in his place, and he knows it's supposed to be a message, but he's not getting the message. What's this all about? So he's got these soothsayers, he's got these wizards, all these religious types in his country, and he tells them, I want to know what that means. It's from the gods, and I want an answer. I want an interpretation. And he says, but I want the right one. So in order to get the right one, I'm not going to let you guys just come and give me some old opinion. You tell me what the statue was I saw, then I'll know that the gods are talking to you. And they say, wait a minute, we don't have that kind of knowledge, not real knowledge, and we don't really know what that statue looked like. He says, then you're a waste of my money. I'm wiping a whole bunch of you out and starting out, well, this is a paraphrase, by the way, you won't read that in Daniel. But that's the point. And so he does, he orders the death of all the wizards, all the soothsayers, all the wise men. And because they can't tell him what he saw, they have no idea. But Daniel, if you read the text, chapter 1, when he was deported, because he's one of the Israeli deportees, he's in exile, God gave him gifts, and one of the gifts was interpretation. If you read the text, you'll see that Daniel says, wait, before you kill us all, I can tell what that statue was. And he goes ahead and he tells Nebuchadnezzar what it was. Then he tells him what it means. And Nebuchadnezzar, of course, buys into this because that's precisely what he asked. He asked somebody that knew what they were talking about. And the real point was that there was going to come an age-long process when the countries of the world would be in charge of the world, so to say, and people God called to himself would always be under their control. They would be under the Babylonians, and they would be under the Persians and Cyrus, then they'd be under the Greeks and Alexander the Great, and then they'd be under the Romans, and it's right down to our day. If you're a Christian, you're a believer, you're under the government of the United States. Oh, I am. I'm a believer. I obey the laws. I'm under the Gentiles. This is not really, we have a lot of Christian influence in the country, but there's no such thing as a real Christian country. But in this country, we have a great many advantages. By the way, it did come out of the Christian church, but that's another story. But the point is that till the end of time, whoever God calls to know himself will always be under some Gentile ruler. And that was what the statue was telling him, and that's what Daniel interpreted. Now, why did I say that? Because if you're coming to a pastorate like I did, you're coming to Georgetown. I came not too far. I came from Ipswich, so it was an easy way over. But that 8 miles I'm away from where I grew up. But anyway, but nevertheless, if you're going to be serious about being a pastor, you better have some gifts for what you're called to do. Now, I had a very specific call. My call was not a guess I made. It was not a feeling I had. I was reading the Bible for the very first time. Very first. I was a brand new Christian. It just come out. I'll go into that a little bit more later because of what I really want to share with you this morning. But I came to become a believer when I was in the Army. I was almost at the end, I thought, of my term, my active duty. And Kennedy extended us all for a year, and I'll tell you what I felt about that. But anyway, not good. But anyway, when I got called, it was through the 17th verse of the 3rd chapter of Ezekiel. Now, who reads Ezekiel? The same people that probably read Numbers. I don't know. They're very difficult books in many ways, and Ezekiel's a hard one because it's apocalyptic. It's an ancient book. It's hard to decipher. But I'm dutiful reading the Bible. I'm going to read the Bible. Never read it before. Brand new to me. I mean, I knew a lot about it because I'm an American, but I didn't really read it. And I'm reading through, and all of a sudden, I come to the 17th verse of the 3rd chapter of Ezekiel, and it's like electricity went up my spine. I can't explain it to this day. I knew, I don't know how, I knew God's talking to me right now, stop and listen. And I did. And I could feel it. And it said, Son of man, that means mere human being, I have made you a watchman for the house of Israel. If you see the sword coming, warn them. If you don't warn them, the sword will come and their blood will be on your hands. I read that, and I knew somehow that was my call. Now that's interesting beyond what I'm telling you. So when I began to see what God was doing with my life, because I paid pretty good attention. First of all, I knew that's my call, so how do you do it? And God gave me 2 gifts and a warning of sorts. The first gift was, He gave me a kind of inbuilt timetable, meaning I had a real ease in remembering dates, times, places. It was never a struggle for me. When I knew, I mean, they fit together. And I knew it was this date, that date, the other date. I didn't have to go back and study it all the time. I didn't know them automatically. I mean, I read them once or I learned them. But when I knew it, I knew it. And I had a sense of the connectedness of all of this. That was very good for the call I got. I was called to the first independent congregational church in America. That's the Bible Parish Church. And that church had a profound effect on how the Massachusetts colony was first shaped, and then how that shape or that constitution informed the federal constitution. And if you look at that church closely, and I was a pastor of it, you discovered that out of that church came so many things we appreciate as a culture. Like voting for the pastor. Oh, they voted for the selectmen. Like meeting at the church meetings. Well, they voted at town meetings. In other words, they took the life of the church and they just morphed it over into the culture. So we ended up with a culture, America, that was kind of modeled after the church. and the freedoms that were experienced within the life of the church. After all, they came out of Europe to be free. They didn't come over here to be enslaved. They came over here to worship freely, speak freely, do all of this freely. And they took it right over into their town governments and into their county governments. And we enjoy it to this day. A lot of people don't realize that. We seem to be given the word that the church is a big drag on America or something. Well, without it, unless it came from another direction, we wouldn't have America the way we've had it and the freedoms we've enjoyed. They came out of these congregational churches. That's why we're not Presbyterian. That's fine. I'm not against Presbyterians, by the way, or Methodist, and I'm not against any of that. But we are different. Congregationalists run the church as the congregation, not as the pastor. Pastor's enable to teach, to lead, yes, but not to run the church. The congregation runs the church the way we're supposed to run our country. Go to the voting booth, vote, give your voice. Yeah, it's where it came from. So, now here I am, a young man who again, I'll go back to how I actually became a believer in a bit. Yeah, I really want you to know that. But I have this inbuilt timetable. So it's a gift that God gave me, and I understood it. It became more and more apparent as time went on. But what I didn't have, what I didn't have was a schedule. In other words, I didn't have any clue as to what God had in mind for me, for the church, for the history, for anything. I mean, I'm like anybody else. I got to find out. And God didn't hand me a gift of knowledge, so to say. He led me by the people he sent along my path. That's very interesting to me. Now, I'm looking back at this, by the way, with 50 years of hindsight. I was there for 49 years in that church. So I have a pretty good understanding of the life of that church, where it came from, because I studied it, and where it's been for the last 50 years, because I experienced it. So what I began to notice was, you've been sending people to me to give me insight, to lead me, to help me, to teach me. It's people you've used more than anything else. And I brought this book just as an example. The very first preacher I invited to be a guest preacher is a man I met, became my friend. His name is Peter Marshall. Now, Peter Marshall Sr. died of a heart attack when he was a Senate chaplain. And they made a movie out of it, if you may have seen it in our time, 50s or 60s, I forget when it came out, A Man Called Peter. Yes, that was an old movie. This is his son, Peter Marshall. He and I became good friends. Peter Marshall, after he came to Byfield in 1970, he preached on a Wednesday night. He was really good. And about 5 years later, he published this book, The Light and the Glory. The Light and the Glory is a tremendous insight into what I've been just talking about, God's way in this country. And what people like Columbus and like Washington and like Adam, what they were talking about. He took, quoting what they said. Very interesting book to read, The Light and the Glory. My point is, just as an illustration, he was the first preacher here. This Byfield Parish Church, as I say, by the way, it's part of Georgetown. You know, maybe all of you don't know. We're a parish, not a town. Half of the old church building was in Georgetown, half of it was in Newbury. The line went right through the church. Then we built a new one, and that's all in Georgetown. So I'm not talking about some other remote place. I'm talking about us. So I come here in 1969. I was called here in 69. And I say, I don't have a schedule in front of me. I have a gift of interpretation, if you want to call it that, about history. I have a sense of it. I have a sense of how it connects. I have a sense. And now I'm in a historical church beyond belief. I'm in the first independent congregational church in America. Now, is this of God, or is this just my hoopla? Let me just tell you this. I won't go on, but let me tell you this. The greatest move in the world after Christ, probably in changing the world, was the Great Reformation. When Martin Luther brought those 95 challenges to the Church of Rome in 1517, that changed the world. The northern part of Europe became Protestant. America became basically Protestant originally. That had a tremendous sweeping effect. The belief is that I'm trying to say this short term, I'm watching that clock, it's a, they never should invent a clock. What I want to say is simply this, that the date given for the 95 theses that Luther posted that changed so much, challenges to the way the church was operating, is said to have been on October 31st, 1517. If you know your history, that comes through. But that came from his protege, Melanchthon. It's now been discovered that that's not true. He wrote it as a letter he sent to his Archbishop, Albrecht, and Albrecht didn't like what he wrote and knew what he was going to read, so he postponed opening the letter until November 17th in 1517. When I read that, I said, ooh, wait a minute. November 17th, 1517, the Great Reformation really begins. November 17th, in 1706, the Byfield Parish Church was born. November 17th, 1706. It was incorporated on that date. On that date, at the same day, the first pastor of the church was ordained. On November 17th, in 1939, I was born. I was born in Ipswich, Massachusetts, which has, if you pay attention to town seals, says on the town seal, birthplace of American independence. I'm called to the Byfield Parish Church, which was ordained on the same day as I was born, not the same day, day, and it's the first independent congregational church in America. Then I discover, through one of the men in my church who does genealogies, I am the fifth cousin of the first pastor. 8 generations later, the first cousin of the first pastor, who was ordained on November 17th in 1706, is now followed by the boy born in 1939 on November 17th in the church, the town that gave America its independence. Is that just a crazy coincidence? No. No, I don't think so anyway. I don't think, and then giving me the gift of interpretation of history. Okay, I can't go any further with what I was going to go, but let me just tell you, bang, 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 like bullet points. Here's what happened. Well, in fact, I am going to read this one statement. No, I didn't write it down. I'll tell you what the statement is. In the history of Byfield, written by John Lewis Yule in 1902 for the 200th anniversary, he says each of the first 3 pastors had a specific role or gift. Responsibility is maybe a better word. The first pastor had a distinct effect on government. Why? Because Governor Dummer Academy was the only school feeding Harvard back in that era. Governor Dummer Academy fed Harvard for the first 25 years before Phillips came into existence. So a lot of the people that led America were coming right through Byfield. And in fact, Edward Everett Hale, who wrote Man Without a Country, and was at the time, turn of the century, last century, 2 centuries ago now, he was the 200th anniversary speaker at Byfield, and he began his oration saying, "It has long since been observed that Newbury, Newburyport, West Newbury, and Byfield form a sort of confederacy, and from this confederacy, nearly every name known to history in America has originally sprung." That was Edward Everett Hale in 1902 at the 200th anniversary of the Byfield Parish Church. Very, very interesting insight. So here I am called to this church that my cousin, way back, was the first pastor, who pastored for 41 years, and I for 49. And we're the only 2 that have pastored more than 40 years in this church. We have pastored 90 of its 312 years. The 2 of us have been pastors of this church. Again, just a very interesting observation to make. Now, this church had a significant role at the beginning in the government. And when I came, some interesting things began to happen. Not of my doing. I had no knowledge of what's coming any more than any of you do or anybody else. But in 1975, we had Jimmy Carter's sister at Byfield for the 3rd time. She was Ruth Carter Stapleton. She was our guest speaker. We had conferences in May. She came in 73. They loved her. It came in 74. They loved her more. She came in 75. They wanted her back probably in place of me by now. You know, I mean, they really liked her. So, but we're sitting at the dining room table. Miriam and my wife Miriam and me, and the two kids were asleep, and Ruth. And Miriam says, now this is May of 1975. Keep that in mind. Those of us know the history of American voting and all. We always vote in the even year in November, right? And then the president takes office in January of the next year. But this is the year before. It's 1975. 76 is the election year. Nixon had just been ousted. And Gerald Ford's running for second term. And we're sitting at the table, and Ruth did, in Fayetteville, North Carolina. And Miriam just said, innocently, it was a Saturday, we had the second day of the conference, she wasn't asking a question so much as she was just making a comment. She said, "You're going back tonight home?" "Yeah, Fayetteville." "Oh, no," Ruth said in her silky southern voice. "Oh, no. God has told my brother he is to be the next president of the United States. And I'm going to Chicago tonight to begin his campaign." Who had ever heard of Jimmy Carter? In 1975, in May. And she didn't say, "Oh, we want our brother to be president, we'll work like dog." No, God has told my brother. Now, why was that said at our table? I've always asked that question. And I don't think she was she would have never told us if Mary hadn't asked the question. She wasn't going around announcing this. She said it at our table in 1975. In 1984, we were working as a church, Byfield Parish Church, working to try to urge many of our fellow churches that had really left the Bible behind. Go back to the Bible. That's what you need. It'll grow your church. It'll strengthen your people. Go back to the Bible. I mean, you don't be silly about it, but it's God's word. It will work. God says, "I'll perform every word I've ever spoken." He is committed to take his word and make it happen. So why don't you just bring his word and watch what he does with it? That's what we were doing at Byfield. We're growing like weeds. Deers were dying on the vine. You've seen the building. You know, we had to build that building because we outgrew the old one within 10 years. And it was only handful, maybe 10 people in attendance when I came. And there were over 250 in 10 years. And we had to build a new building to house everything. And now it's 1984, and I had become on the board of directors of a national work of bringing the Bible back into the congregational churches. But in 1974, we held a convocation at Byfield. We used Governor Dummer Academy because it was a national convocation. We had people coming from as far away as Hawaii. They came to the convocation, and we formed the Biblical Witness Fellowship at Byfield. Somehow, that put us on the radar screen in Washington, D.C., and I began to receive invitations to the White House every other month for 2 years, the Reagan White House, for briefings on all administrative policies that had a moral contingent to them. And then I was added to the State Department list. I was just watching, I don't know if you watch Fox at all, but I watch, what's his name's son? Come on. He was on 60 Minutes, Wallace. Yeah, what's his name? Chris Wallace. He had, last week, an interview with George Shultz. They were talking about what's going on now in terms of diplomacy, and I'm saying to I said to I spent 2 years being briefed by George Shultz, because I was at the State Department when Shultz was Secretary of State for 2 years. Now, in 2002, your wife, Gary's wife, gets a call. She's the secretary of our church. It's the White House calling me to be down with Bush when he announced faith-based initiatives. So, and then, because of Biblical Witness Fellowship that starts at the Byfield Parish Church, we get invited to the Oval Office to sit with 2 hours with the President of the United States talking about what was happening inside the mainline churches of North America. Well, you see what I'm getting at? It seems to be that God has repeated this focus on government that he had with my cousin, with that first pastor. It's very, very interesting. Now, here's the real point. It's been 30 minutes of introduction. The real point is, I wanted to share with you, this is Pearl Harbor Day. This did not start when I came to Byfield. It started in my life earlier than that. And I'll pick out one particular incident that you would not think could happen in this world. In 1968, fall of 1968, I shook hands and spoke with Masao Fuchida. Masao Fuchida radioed back to his command ship, Tora, Tora, Tora. He was a lead pilot in the attack on Pearl Harbor. And he and I met in 1968. And I discovered that he had the same experience I had had in relationship to the Christian faith. I had shamed myself. I was in the Army for 3 years. I grew up in a family that was very patriotic, and I am to this day. I went to serve the country, and I was glad to do it. I had given them 3 years to get a special training they offered. If you take 2 years, you get drafted, they do with you what you want, but 3 years, you get to choose your training. That's how it was in our era, if you remember. And I took the 3 years and was trained in guided missile electronics, and I was teaching guided missile electronics to mostly West Germans down in El Paso, Texas, which was our artillery base. And I was about to end my 3 years. It was the end of August 1961. I had a trial scholarship to Texas Western University. I had it all packed. I'm all ready to go. I had an early discharge of about 20 days, so I could go out on September 3rd. And I was just going to go across town to the Texas Western University. That was my plan. I was 22 years old. 21, I guess, at the time. So anyway, I was standing my last guard duty, and so excited because guard was one of the worst duties we had to pull. We're out in the Mexico desert along with the scorpions, the rattlesnakes, the tarantulas, everything you can think of, and we had to walk for 2 hours not knowing where they were at night, not if they slept at night or not. Anyway, it was not fun. And this was my last time of God. Wow, I'm out of here 4 or 5 days. And all of a sudden the loudspeakers come on. Now hear this, now hear this. All military personnel are extended 1 year by presidential order. They were building the Berlin Wall. And the Pentagon didn't know what it meant. And they were holding all the military right in place for a year to be sure this wasn't the start of a new world war. And I lost a scholarship. I'm not out in 3 days. I was real young, self-centered, did what any good red-blooded, self-centered sinner will do. I said, to hell with your missiles, I won't guard them. Now I really thought down deep, it won't matter. I'm 40 miles from El Paso in the middle of the desert, who will know? Well, would you believe my officer a day inspected the post and turned me in for sleeping on guard. And I wasn't guarding my company or the battalion, I was guarding the missiles that were guarding the Western world. And if I was lucky, I was going to get life at Leavenworth. If I wasn't lucky, they'd treat me like a war. We're in a Cold War, maybe they'd just shoot me. I didn't know, but I knew when I reported to the battalion commander that morning, and I was called to report to the battalion commander, I knew it was not good. I knew that. And I went in there, I could walk, but just barely. I was scared to death. I just knew this was the end. And I went into the sergeant major to report, and the battalion commander's a colonel, he's in the next office. The sergeant major never looked at me at all. He had the manila folder from the night before the officer of the day's report before him. It's about 9 in the morning. And I'm standing at attention, and he reading, it's getting worse and worse by the second. I'm standing there. And he looks up and he said, is this true? Well, again, remember, I've been in 3 years, and I didn't say, well, let me tell you how I was feeling. This guy has been in 20 years. He's fought at Normandy, Anzio, Hamburger Hill. This guy's been through combat, and he's lost friends in combat. And he's got a sleeping guard in front of him who is supposed to be guarding the secrets of the Western world, who has a top secret clearance, by the way, to teach these things. I knew all of that. And he says to me, is this true? And I said, yes, Sergeant. And I expected to go into the next office. I could already in my mind see I was like a vision. I could see the MPs waiting for me. Take me to my court-martial and then to Fort Leavenworth. He turned the manila envelope over, he put it there, and he says, I want you to get out of here, and I don't ever want to see you again. I was breathless. I did not. I said, yes, Sergeant, once more. I did an about face, turned, and I went out his door, and I crossed the corridor, and I went out the next door. And I must have, I don't even know, I was nothing religious about me, and there's nothing faithful about me, but I guess I was in a foxhole. I must have prayed. I don't even remember hardly doing that. Because I stepped on the top step of battalion headquarters, and when I did, I heard an inward voice, as clear as yours, say, you asked me, and I've just answered you. And my life changed. Totally. Right there. Now it's 1968. And I'm talking, I'd heard speak Masao Fuchida. And Masao Fuchida had led the raid on Pearl Harbor. He's very famous for that. And he was a military man. He was doing his military work. I don't know what was in his heart. That's up to God. But when he got back to be briefed, he discovered that he had done what no Japanese warrior ever does. He attacked a sleeping enemy. You do not sneak attack. You wake your enemy up if you have to, but you never, never fight a sleeping enemy. It's against the code. And he discovered that America had not been warned. The attempt, I guess, had been made, but it never got through. And that burned a hole in his soul. And he was called in by MacArthur, as all the high American military were, to be briefed or debriefed. You know, he was a soldier. He wasn't a criminal. He hadn't run a concentration camp. He had just done his job as a flight man. And he was getting off the train, and there was a man standing there who had been on KP when Pearl Harbor had been bombed. He was I believe, in the Air Force. Well, the Army Air Corps. And when he heard about the bombing, he settled in his own heart, if I ever see a Jap, I'll kill him on principle. He just hated what the Japs had done. And he was flying at some point over the hump with materials, and they crashed, and he ended up in a Japanese prisoner of war camp. And somebody snuck a piece of the Bible, not a Bible, but a piece of the Bible into the war camp, and he read it, and it changed his life. And he got out of there, his name was Jake DeShatha. He got out of there and he wrote this story about what happened to him in that prisoner of war camp out as a pamphlet. And he went to Japan with it. And he was standing at the Tokyo train station when Fuchida got off the train. And he handed Fuchida his story. And Fuchida read it. Went in to see MacArthur, went out and got a Bible, and changed his life. He had lived with that shame of killing a sleeping enemy. And it worked such a crisis in his heart that when he read that there was forgiveness, he accepted it. And he and I met on, probably it was about April, or maybe it was fall of 1968. And I thought back, and at the time I thought something about it. I'd read history, I knew history. I mean, I was a 5-year-old when the guys were coming back from World War II. It wasn't that. But as time went on, and I began to put two and two together, that's how God worked in my life. I said, that was one of the men you wanted me to meet. I wanted to show you how really powerful I am. I took this man, and I changed his life. Thank you.